Hello, everybody. So, let me quickly sort of tell you what I hope to do and what I hope to achieve. Uh, I want you all to understand what is design, and hopefully that will excite you, that will allow you to think about design in the future careers and the kind of great future that you plan to have. So, a quick background about myself. I have done my design from the design school in IIT Bombay, and I passed out in '97. And since then, I'm working in a company called Tata RXC, and I've been there, like, if you calculate, about more than 22 years. And we have done many projects. So what I thought, I have my talk or my presentation in two sections. The first one is what I thought I would do is introduce you to design, or introduce you to the practical commercial application of design in the world, the kind of work that design agencies and people like us do. And through that, you'll sort of understand the impact and the kind of thinking that goes. And later on, what I will do, like Samarjit said, I have a few, let's say, thought-provoking sections on what I feel would be a future for all of us in AI, in design, in UX. UX stands for user experience, right? So with that, let me start with the slides. I hope you can see it. Uh, so quick introduction about the company. So we are a part of Tata Group, but otherwise we are a relatively small company. So we are not like a TCS that is focused on IT. We are a product company, we are a technology company, and we have about 5,000 software engineers that do various kinds of technology work. So for example, India sent its mission to Mars, the Mangalyaan. A lot of components of that were designed and built by some of the Tata Elxsi engineers. But on the right side, which is design, which is what I represent, we do a lot of creative work, and this ranges from product design to experience design, and I'll show you some examples of that. And the image that you see is the Mumbai T2 terminal. So this is the beautiful, prestigious airport that some of you might have seen. The entire user experience, the entire passenger experience inside the airport has been designed by us. So everything that you see in the airport, except for the architecture elements, were all created and thought by us to try and give a pleasant and an international experience to all the users of the airport. So that's the kind of work and range that we have. But what I do is I'll get into the specifics of what we do and the different kinds of design that we have. And what then I'll just show you a few examples in each one of these sections. So of course, everybody's heard of car styling and automotive design. That's something that we do. I'll show you some work. We do a lot of product and consumer electronics design. There's branding, graphics. There is UX and HMI, which is what, let's say, my second section would be about, which is user experience. So all the apps that you see, all the touch screens that you have worked with is something that typically is called UX, though UX as a term or as a profession is much larger than just digital experience. And HMI stands for human machine interface, which is when you're designing for cars, designing for products that have physical interfaces that have to be designed for better usability. We do system and service design. I'll show you some work there. And of course, user research is something that is horizontal for all of that. So let me just show you some examples so that you get a feel of what this design as a profession is, this design as a domain is, and then we can go to the other section I was talking about. So let's start with research. And research is is a term that has been used for almost anything and everything, which means you have research that is part of R&D and part of technology and labs and all of that. But there's also this entire section of research which is called consumer research or market research, where we are supposed to understand what people want and where the markets are going and what will be the new trends in research or in products. So this is one example, one project that we did some time back, and you'll realize how exciting the work of research is. So here we were asked to find out, and this was done for Unilever, what is the ice cream eating habits across the world. So just imagine we had to go to different parts of the world, talk to people, talk to young kids, talk to their shops, go to their houses, go to these parks, and really figure out how the same brand of ice cream is treated differently, is consumed differently. What are the perceptions of people buying the ice creams? What do they ask when they choose a particular ice cream? How many times do they share? What is their emotions about ice creams? So Unilever really wanted to understand how does world look at ice creams so that they can design the next products, not only from the packaging point of view but also in terms of flavors and other things. And it is job for people like us who have the ability to really perceive what people think. So this word called ethnography comes in, where I will take an interview of, let's say, the shopkeeper that you see, and through him, I'll try and understand, what is it? What is the transaction is like? What are people really looking for? How does that entire flow go? What would change? What is better, right? So when you talk to many people, you do a lot of observations. That's when you start getting insights that many of the brands or many of the companies might have missed, and that allows you to create the next innovation or the new product that fills a gap in the market. So that is one type of research which we do quite a lot, and this ranges from cars to ice cream. It can be any product. And key thing required is our ability to really understand and have that eye for how people look at things, right? So we are trying to understand people. We also do the other range, other level of research. So this was done for a Japanese truck company, and they wanted to design new cabins for their trucks to be launched in India. But for them to be able to do that really well, it was very important that they understood what is the entire system of trucks and how people actually live and behave, and what is the entire ecosystem of the trucks. And that's what we did. We went, talked to many people, many drivers, many truck owners, and really told them what is the business model, what are the things that people do in the truck, and hence what would be the key design features that are needed to be able to create the next level of truck that will be acceptable in India. Right? So this again, it is market intelligence going back to the brands. So that's what we do. We of course are creative and aesthetic people, so we also do a lot of this kind of work, which is interpreting India for the world, so that when they're coming to India, we can tell them what will work, what are the aesthetics, what are the new styles, what are the kind of elements or functions that people like, right? So this is again something that we do quite a lot to be able to interpret the trends in India. So these were just a few examples of research. I mean, there's lots of projects that we do, ranging from medical to, like I said, FMCG, digital, lots of work. So that is research, and we have a full division that does that work, and it is quite exciting, as you can see, and it's always something new. It's always insightful, always trying to predict how people will behave. Now we have this entire COVID situation, so how people's buying habits have changed, how people's perception about products have changed. So all that insights, all that intelligence comes from the research team. Coming to automotive design examples, again, this is, I'm assuming you all sort of know what the entire process would be like. I'll just show you some examples of work that we have done. So many times we have to do projects like these, which are very high level of interior design. And the main purpose of projects like this is the executive, or let's say the main person in my client's company, will be able to take a decision whether we should go with this car design or some other car design. So the quality of visualization of design becomes a very important part before they go to the physical models that are typically done in a car, right? And the ability to create something that is realistic allows that decision making to be done. And that's part of my job, to really come up with designs, but not just that, also be able to communicate that. Right? But as a design process, it's a standard process where we do a lot of sketching, we do a lot of understanding of what are the consumer expectations, and then we sort of take it to the next level of renderings and representations. Right? So this is a typical render that a car designer in my company would do when he has spare time, because unfortunately we would love to buy this car or sell this car or make this car, but currently I don't think it is practical. But it's still beautiful, and we like doing beautiful things. Right? So this was another project based on the Tata Harrier, so it was done before that. So Again, I have many projects in automotive, but I'll not get into details. Branding and graphics is, again, I'm assuming you know what obviously branding is, but essentially for us, branding means trying to really create a visual interpretation of the values that a company holds. And that becomes an important part because the customer connects to the brand or to the company through the touch points, and these touch points typically are branding elements. So it could be a form that you're filling, it could be how a logo looks on a particular product, it could be how a tone of voice or how an ad comes to you. All of that are elements of branding, and that is how a customer and a company really sort of create a relationship amongst themselves. So to understand what are the values of a company and representing that in a graphic and communication form is again something that is done as a part of branding. And again, you need a fair bit of creative designers to be able to bring that sort of values which are tend to be sort of intangible into a tangible level where you can actually see or touch certain things. So I'll just show you a couple of projects. So this is a lot of work we do for Taj. So a lot of Taj palaces have been, branded by us. So right from the iconography to the kind of stationery to the bed linen to the bathroom slippers, everything that a person sees or touches in a branded environment would be typically designed by us, right? So this includes communication. This includes how the app would look. It includes, all touch points, as I was saying earlier. And this can range to many things. I mean, I'm just showing you some elements of retail, but we've also done lots of product design, lots of packaging design, lots of graphic. So for example, whether it's this ankle soap or Ponds or the Formula GX. So a lot of work in terms of packaging, and some of it, of course, goes all the way to graphics. Right. Again, I can say that communication can range to many things. So this was during the good old IPL days. I don't know when they're going to come back, but work like this. But also branded environments, creating spaces where you like to be. Product design, again, products are something that we use, something that is physical, something that you really touch, but the way they look really is less important than the way they function. And here a lot of engineering needs to go in so that my product comes as a complete solution. How it works with the engineering inside, whether it is software engineering or hardware, and how it looks, how it performs, how it communicates what it is supposed to do, is again something that comes together in product design. And that again is a very exciting field that we practice. Right? So typically any project that we starts with a lot of brainstorming, a lot of thinking. So on the top right, all the tiny sketches that you see was part of a project where we were trying to have a small little dog that was a toy dog, that's a robotic dog that we were creating for a Japanese company. And with just a couple of motors, we had to figure out all the gestures that this pet dog could do based on some AI, some music, some sort of communication or some kind of a command. And these were just a simple lines of sketch trying to see whether a particular format of the internal mechanical configuration can allow various gestures to be done. So these were some of the work that we did there. But otherwise, we do a lot of products that are just beautiful to look at. So this is a Bluetooth speaker that was inspired by the Iktara that Tansen used to use, which is like a single string instrument. But we also do a lot of medical products. So this was done for GE. And again here, if I can get into a little bit of details, typically if you see an X-ray machine, it's a very strange situation where the poor patient is, let's say, lying on the bed, and this huge machine comes on top of her, and the operator or the doctor who's supposed to take the X-ray will go and hide behind some kind of a metal box or behind some shield, and then he'll fire the machine. So it is very strange and very wrong interface where the patient is left vulnerable, feeling helpless in front of this machine, while the doctor hides behind a shield. Now that is needed because X-rays, continuous exposure to X-rays can be, let's say, harmful. So what we did as a part of our research, and especially material research, we found this particular glass that was X-ray resistant. So we incorporated that as a part of the product so that now the operator could actually stand along with the patient while taking the X-ray. And then the glass allowed us to have projection on it so that I could have interface, I could have commands and controls on the glass itself. So again, this is an example of how product design can create new innovations, create new sort of push the boundary of what is expected norms so that the world moves forward. Like I said, we do a lot of infrastructure work in terms of, right. So most of the, at least the modern looking airports will have signage that has been designed by us. And by signage, what is very funny is if I tell somebody that, oh, मैंने इसका sign बनाया, I've done the signage for, let's say, a metro or for an airport, they will say to it, oh, that's just like the board that tells you where the toilet are, right? But it is much deeper than that. The idea or the requirement is that if there is an explosion or if there is some kind of fire and the entire airport or the metro has to be evacuated in 3 minutes, then this has to be designed such that in that stressful moment, the person would be able to understand what the signs stand for and be able to follow, right? The readability, the consistency, all of that starts becoming important when designing signage. In an airport, for example, or in the metro, the sign is, or signage is what stands in place of the authority. You see a sign and then you trust it. So there's a lot of elements that go, behind the design of signage, and that is something that we do quite a lot. And signage becomes the visual identity of any location. Right? So this is the Mumbai airport that I talked about. This is another exciting project that we did for Kochi Metro. I don't know if anybody in the audience is from Kochi. So the entire design language that you see in the Kochi Metro has been designed by us. So right from the brand to the livery, which is the graphics that you see on the train, to the app, to the signage, to all the touch points, including the announcements, including lots of other things that a person would actually come across. And that is something that we did as a complete design solution for Kochi Metro. So it comes under system design, it comes under service design for us. Right? We also use technology to create spatial experiences. So whether it's a high-tech showroom or something like this, where we use a lot of projection mapping and a lot of storytelling to really tell different elements of what we do. So again, we've done quite a few projects. And these projects tend to bring in content design, which is creating of the animations and the movies, and technology, whether it is projection mapping or something else. And of course, the spatial design in terms of creating the space where this entire thing is conducted. So all our museum designs, exhibition designs, all come under sort of this category. So what I'll show now, so this is what I showed earlier was, let's say, the exteriors or the design or the mechanical design elements of automotive design. In this section, what I'll show you is the HMI design of automotive, where if you've sat in a car, what quickly and typically happens is you forget how the car looks from the outside. And what matters is how the car works, how the car functions, how the buttons work. Right? So creating the user interface so that you can choose the correct song while you're driving, or be able to pick up a call, or be able to do certain functions, those become very important. And that is the HMI work that we do. So all Jaguar Land Rover cars for the last 5 years and the next 5 years, the entire interior HMI design has been done by my team. So we're fairly proud of that work. All Tata Motors cars, the HMI again comes from us. So it's a fair bit of work and that we have seen over the last few years. I'll start with a small film, and this is just a 3-minute film that sort of shows you the process of UX design, right from research to some examples of work. So just a 3-minute thing, just have a listen. So that was a quick sort of run through some of the work that we do in UX design. And many times people ask this question that, how come a designer can do so many different things, right? I mean, not only am I talking about a large range of things on the digital side, which is whether it is a medical or a car, but also on the physical side, whether it is creating a product or coming up with a brand. And my answer to that is, imagine if you do marketing from, let's say, IIM Bangalore, right? As a marketing graduate from IIM Bangalore, you can sell soaps and you can sell cars, right? So the profession that you have learned can be applied across various industries. And that's the advantage of design, because the way we, as a profession and as a professional, the way we look at products and objects is purely from one, a lot of common sense, but also a lot of usability. What would people want? How would people really react? What is it that they're expecting to happen? How can I predict their needs? And this ability to really understand what people want and really know what technology is out there allows design and designers to be really important. And in fact, going forward, it's going to be even more and more important, because design and designers are going to be the interface between the people and all the technologies, right? You cannot reach a technology, you cannot use a technology unless there is a design interface that is there to help you use the technology, right? Most people are taking technology for granted. You don't know how a phone works, but you definitely want it to work when you press a particular button. So that's what the sort of importance of design. And so I've done my post-graduation in design, and I would definitely encourage at least some of you, if not all, to really think of design as a great way to sort of study further. So I'll just show you more examples, and then I'll go to the other presentation that I was talking about. So this was done for Nissan in the Shanghai Motor Show. And again, the complete interface of what should be the car experience for the future within the car, right? So these are some digital clusters. So your instrument cluster is no longer going to be a simple dial. It's going to be much more complex and much more fluid, depending on what you drive and what is the location, what is the context your the instrument cluster is going to change. So this is some of that work. Of course, we do a lot of UX for apps and other products. So if anybody is going to study in the US, so the app that you've used is something that we have designed by us. Right? Lots of apps that are Netflix equivalent in India. Right. So we do a lot of virtual reality work nowadays. So this is was done for in Geneva Motor Show, where we created these 6 booths, and we had this entire digital content, virtual 3D content of cars that you could sit, choose a location, whether it is a desert or whether it's a mountain, and you can drive your car on that. And this was using HoloLens. So again, this is brand new technology that we are able to quickly convert and make it usable and experienceable for the people. Right. So with that, let me start my other presentation. That was just, like I said, an example of work that we do. And so this is also some work that we do anyway, but this is slightly more future looking, slightly more, I feel that should allow all of us to think, especially when it comes to user experience and artificial intelligence sort of coming together, and then what is good, what is bad, what could happen. So I'll briefly show you some examples in this direction. To put it very simply, as a designer, I like to make everything simple. I like to look at things very simply. So I've made it as a very simple thing, right? So if you look at a human, I can really convert that into 3 things. One is the intelligence part of it. The second is the emotion and empathy. The emotion is how you feel. Empathy is your ability to know how others feel. Right? So it's a very simplistic way of putting, but these are the key elements. And you can easily map AI for the intelligence, and you can map UX, which is the design element, towards the emotion and empathy. So when both these sort of domains come together, or work is happening with both of them together, there's a huge potential, and there's so many things that can happen. Plus, there's some positives, there's some negatives, and I'll just show a couple of them. So there are 3 points that I want to make. So let me start with the first point. And this is slightly, hopefully you'll think about this later on, because it is something that happens to all of us every day, and maybe it should allow us to change our perspective slightly, right? So these are expectations that are sort of going all over the place, running amok, right? And I'll illustrate this by a very simple chart. So if you think about it, let's say from 1960s, when none of you were born, to let's say in the future, you can expect our expectations to keep going higher. You keep wanting more and more things from the technology that is out there, right? If you look at how technology is progressing, what you'll find is there are these inflection points at 2 locations. And I've drawn this sort of red line, and somewhere, let's say between 1990s. And the point I want to make here is, before this, the technology used to surpass what people used to expect or want from it, right? Your father might tell you that, we used to have these thick manuals to really look at all the software functions that are out there. We used to not know what other things a particular product can do. In this case, this toaster, 90% of the people who bought the toaster never bothered to understand what those 4 buttons are there for, right? And that's what you can imagine, the situation where products were over-engineered, products had so many features, and people didn't care, or they were quite happy, with the basic things. Now, what has happened with all this gimmicks and marketing and the active sort of information that all of us have, we are quickly assuming that the technology can do far more than what it can actually do. So our expectations are much higher than what it can deliver. I mean, if you take a simple Amazon or Siri or any one of that, you ask something, you expect it to work, and it doesn't work. And there's a big danger of these over promises that a brand can do. I'll tell you a simple sort of a story. So I was taking one of those flights, I think it was via Dubai to US or whatever. And Emirates had just launched their internet. So you had internet on planes, and obviously the plane and the air hostess and the brand, they were all very happy saying, yay, we have internet on the plane. And they advertised about it, and when the plane reached a particular height, they announced saying that you have access to internet now. So this dude next to me opened his laptop, connected to Facebook, started browsing, and it was all fine. But then within 5 minutes, for whatever reasons, that internet connection broke or it stopped. He got very angry. He said, this bloody thing never works. Now, if you think about it, this is the first time he's using internet high up in the sky. Yet his expectations from that was that he's going to get a steady, great connection the way he has it in his house. Right? He was not allowing the technology any space or any excuse not to perform the way he expected it. And what's going to happen when the plane's going to land? He's going to crib to his friends that, oh, these plane guys can't even put a simple internet, right? So it's going to backfire. And that is what's happening in multiple areas, right? You take autonomous cars, for example. You announce that a car can drive itself, and then of course it can't, and it'll hit something, right? So this unfortunate use of the interface that does not represent the technology behind it is a problem. And that's what we designers are trying to solve. How can I make sure that a person understands what a product can do and what it cannot do? I'll show you one more example. I don't know how many of you have. So this is what I'm saying is the role of the UX, but let me give an example. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Her. So let me just run this, and then I can talk about it.
Hello, I'm here.
Oh. Hi.
Hi. How you doing?
I'm well. How's everything with you?
Pretty good, actually. It's really nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you too. Oh, what do I call you? Do you have a name?
Yes. Samantha.
Really? Where'd you get that name from?
I gave it to myself, actually.
How come?
Because I like the sound of it. Samantha.
Like, when did you give it to yourself?
Well, right when you asked me if I had a name, I thought, yeah, he's right. I do need a name, but I wanted to pick a good one. So I read a book called How to Name Your Baby, and out of 180,000 names, that's the one I like the best.
Wait, you read a whole book in the second that I asked you what your name?
So the point I want to make here is if your Siri started to talk like Scarlett Johansson, right? If your Google Home started to sound like that, you will obviously expect it to have the same level of intelligence that a human has, right? And that's where there's a big downfall of having this relatively easy to create fancy graphics or fancy interfaces that are not living up to the expectations of the technology, right? If your Siri started to talk robotic, you'll expect it to be like a robot, have limitations, and then you will be much more gentle with it. You'll ask your question slowly, you'll ask your question in a simple way, and then you'll have a better success, right? So the point I'm trying to make is, because there are these wrong expectations that are being set, we have to design interfaces which will bring back this expectation and make all of this work. After some time, like I showed in the next second inflection point, when AI becomes really well, your products will start surprising you again, because now they can do much more than what you're expecting. But till AI reaches that level, you'll have to run through this next 5, 7, 8 years of this limbo where the technology is still catching up to expectations, right? And for a UX designer, these are some of the key things that we're trying to do in the next 5 years. How do I recreate a sense of wonder for technology? How do I really teach humans empathy towards technology? How do I make sure that the expectations are set correct? Right? I'll show you one example so that you have a much more concrete answer or something in front of you to show how this can be done. So this is a project that we've done for Mercedes, and essentially it is creating an HMI for an autonomous driving car. So you can imagine what will happen if you're sitting in a car and the car is driving itself. you need to really start knowing what the car can do and what the car cannot do. And there are many elements of design that we do. So for example, there is position mapping, or let's say heads-up display on the screen that allows me to project information that the driver will see. And in this case, we have created this consistent behavior so that the car always tells the driver what it is going to do before it does it itself, right? You can imagine panicking if the car suddenly starts going to the left and you don't know why. But when you see this blue path, then you know that the car knows where it's going, and then you'll be relaxed. So these are examples of interface that allow the correct empathy or correct understanding of what's happening to be brought to life so that people can appreciate it. And it becomes very important in autonomous driving. And here's another example. I mean, had it been your wife's driving, you will be very, very worried, and will be telling, see, there's a white van standing there. I don't know what's he doing. Is he going to come in your way? Be careful, right? But there's nobody there to talk to. The car senses that you are uncomfortable, and then it will paint that van green to tell you that don't worry, I've seen that, right? So one of the things that we have done as a part of technology is we have inward-looking cameras that are typically used for drowsiness detection, right? But here we are also using that to have gaze detection, that have emotion detection. So what happens is the car is able to understand that I'm feeling tense and I'm continuously looking at this big bus that seems to be coming my way, and hence the car will tell me, don't worry, I've seen the bus, right? Or let's take voice commands. Voice commands are so difficult to really be enjoyable in any car or any environment. But here, because I'm using my voice along with data, it becomes very easy to give a command. So the car understands where I'm looking, and then it brings up the command that I can use. So I can just use 1 or 2 words for that. Here's another example.
Overtake.
Right. So that was first point about expectations, how not to let them run away. The second point is more about choice, more about paradox of choice. And again, this is something that all of us might be experiencing, that our needs don't really reduce. We keep adding more and more expectations, more and more needs that we want. And typically, especially when you're talking about a UX or an app or a phone design, you will create more and more apps that are targeted towards the specific needs that you have. So if whether it's travel, whether it's movie, you'll have so many apps that allow you to do that, right? In each app, you have so much of control, so that allows you to, great control and precision in terms of how you want to satisfy your need. This was fine 4 years ago, right? Now what has happened, as those needs are exploding, all this choice and all this control has become really a headache, and our experience is actually going down, right? And people no longer want to install so many apps. They no longer really want to know how to use them. They just want a simple need to be satisfied. And this is where an AI will play a big role. Because now we're going to have, I mean, they're calling it super apps nowadays, but essentially it's an OS-led, there's a OS-led intervention that allows you to talk or just, have an interface that is very simple, and that will allow you to, get all your needs satisfied through background apps that don't need to come up in the front, because now the OS and AI can really understand your needs and command or take control of the apps that are out there. Again, coming back to the cars, I'll show you again an example of work that we do. So if you look at features that are there in a car, so this is a screenshot of features that are there in a Lexus. There are many features, right? And I'm talking about car HMI, car automotive, UX design. Now, all these features come to the driver, or driver interfaces with their features through 3 key touch points. You have the heads-up display, you have the infotainment system, that I talked about. You have the instrument cluster that I showed earlier, and maybe you might have a connected app. If you just take the infotainment system, there are so many features in the infotainment system itself. If you like just the media inside that, there are so many features inside the media. In fact, I can have so many features that I can fill up the entire screen, right? And these are increasing. If you sit in any modern car, they'll keep talking about all these vague new features that are coming your way. And the expectation of the usage of this is that the driver looks at the situation around him and then picks up the correct feature to use, right? And this is going to become more and more difficult if you have too many features. And going back to my point about paradox of choice becoming painful, at a point you do not want so many features, right? So what we have created and what AI will really help in is where the situation is very simple, that I have some kind of a overlay. In this case, we are calling it the co-pilot, who will understand the situation for you and will pluck out the correct feature for you to use so that the driver can drive peacefully. So these are the interventions that we're doing when it comes to using AI and UX for, let's say, an automotive is what I'm showing. So there are various features of this co-pilot that I will not get into. And the last point, this is something that I feel is the future, and maybe some things that some of you can become millionaires and billionaires because you are able to exploit this. But think about this, right? Think about age. Think about what products increase in value as they age. I've not turned on the mics, but the point is, most people when asked this question will scratch their head and at the most will come up with these two, right? There was somebody that I was talking to the other day, and he said real estate. So now, of course, the real estate is going down, but that is something that can increase in value with age. But have you thought of relationships? Your relationship with your friend, with your cousin, with your spouse, with your brother, they increase in value as you spend more time with each other as they age, right? And this is something that we have never really thought about. And now we are in a situation where we should think about it. I mean, we can always say that, I've always loved my car and I've always loved my phone or whatever, right? But if you think about it, it's a one-way love, right? You have no feedback or you have no return of your emotions from the product that you are caring about. And it does not change with age. It does not know anything or doesn't do specifically anything about you, right? Now, with AI, machine learning, and all the features and all the technology that we have, a relationship is something that can become a new product offering. Your product will learn with you, will grow with you, and hence it will become valuable. This is missing in most products today. And even if it is there, it is currently only some recommendation engines on Amazon that says that, oh, because you bought this product, why don't you buy this one? I mean, that is very juvenile, that is very simple, but there's a chance and there's an opportunity for relationships to be created through the time that somebody spends with the product. Okay, just think about it. I mean, wouldn't that grandfather's Rolex that he's given to me, that has so many stories, so many memories, so much of emotion attached to it, it will be much more valuable to me than a brand new Rolex that I might get, right? And this is a physical product. I mean, it may not even spoil with age. If you talk about software, the software doesn't spoil with age, right? So then why aren't those emotions and the relationship being created when you start using a software product, right? Why doesn't my Microsoft know more about me? I've spent so many years on these products and they don't really care whether it's me or somebody else. There is no personalization that automatically happens apart from whatever colors that I choose, right? So there's so much of potential in the software products that we use, which they'll form a relationship with me. They have a one-on-one sort of, we grow together and then it becomes very valuable. And then it's impossible for me to give up that relationship, give up that product. And that is going to be the new future, where products are going to win or lose based on their ability to create relationships with their users, right? Because time, if you think about it, time spent with anything, It creates memories, it creates habits, it creates comfort, value, it creates trust. And these are very valuable things that are currently completely unused. So there's a huge potential of creating apps and software products that actually have these kind of elements built into that. And that, I feel, is the real future of AI and UX coming together. Right? Like I said, we have this gamification, customization, but that's still a bit vague. We're working on certain things, but even there, I'm not sure we've reached it yet. But this is where I feel there's a big potential. So these were the 3 key points I wanted to make. One was expectations, to be careful. I mean, not to overpromise. How the super apps or some kind of AI is going to help you reduce the options or make it easy to choose. And relationships, which is where AI will really go. So with that, this is my last slide. What I'm saying is, in the end, we are going to crave for simple experiences. And the world is going to just get more and more complex. And using design, using technology, you can really make that happen. And that is going to be of large value. So with that, thank you very much. And it was a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir. It was quite an enlightening talk. So I think we can move to the questions now.
Sure.
So the first question we have is, what skills should we try to inculcate or practice if we are an undergraduate, considering that we want to get into this domain?
Okay, that's a very good question. So I'll tell you a couple of things. If you see a 5-year-old boy, right, or 5, 6, he can see a small part of a car that is going by, and he'll be able to recognize the car, right? You see a small tail lamp, headlamp, and he's able to say, "Oh, this is that car." A kid will be able to do that. He has that visual acuity. He has that visual memory. All of us, as we grow, we start losing that. Now, even I have to go and see the label of the car before I can recognize it, right? I mean, so there is a bit of this visual acuity, visual memory that I think we should develop. So in IIT, and we had great profs, so we used to just trust them blindly. So we had something called as a night library. And for almost 2, 3, whatever years, we were asked to just go to the library and just look at beautiful magazines. Just keep visually looking at it. You don't have to read anything, just look at magazines. Right? And we used to do it blindly, but what has happened is with that, we are able to sort of see things better, see things deeper. We're able to see when the fonts are not correct. We're able to get a sense of aesthetics. So the easiest thing that you can do is just keep activating yourself, stimulating yourself visually by just seeing a lot of things, right? The second is, of course, thinking. I mean, you will observe things and you should be able to think about it. So why certain things happen? What can I do differently? Is there a problem that I can solve? A misconception about design is that you need to be sketching. You should be able to have great drawing skills and you should be able to sketch. That is nothing. I mean, I cannot sketch to save myself. And still, I think I've done fairly well as a designer. So sketching is just one way to communicate. And in fact, irrespective of whether you're good at sketching or not, doodling or sketching something so that you are communicating with paper and you are able to put something on paper, think about it, keep sort of changing it, where you're not really bothered because you're not going to show that sketch to anybody. That's a great habit to have. So you are sketching to think, and that's a great tool because it allows you to think deeper and think better. So the simplest thing that I would say is keep yourself visually stimulated, keep sketching to think, and not sketching in terms of skills. So skills and all that are separate, that can be easily learned. There are softwares that are there. So that's a simple answer for the question.
All right. So the next question is, what is your favorite example of a product design, like, so which is not done by you? That is.
So I'm an Apple guy. I keep using Apple, and that's a very, very biased and simple answer. But if you look at certain attention to details that you see in certain products, and that really surprises you, that really makes you feel better. I mean, I have this simple AirPod over here, and just the way this hinge works, it's so beautiful, it's so perfect, the way the sound comes. right? So there are these products that are done. Usability problems.
Sir, I think you're not audible. Hello. Your mic is off.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much you all heard, but essentially I was saying that this is a cheat answer. I'm saying Apple as a simple example of products. But what I was trying to say and show is this is a simple AirPod, and just the case, the way it has been designed, the way this hinges work, the way the detailing has been done. So this love with which a product is created is something as a great example of good design. And this is one example that I can give. But yes, it's a bit of a cheating because Apple becomes an easy answer to give.
Okay. So, like, let's move to the next question. So won't it be challenging for humans to handle AI if we empower it with so much power and access to understand what we humans and other devices?
It's never going to be easy. It's we feel that there's a switch that AI will be able to understand us, but it will not. Even now, after many years of staying with a spouse, you're not able to understand a person completely. So that is a misnomer. That is still far away. In fact, what I feel is the reason why humans will still dominate is because AI might still recommend the stuff that I think I need, but AI does not realize that I've got bored. I don't want to go through the same route because now I want to do something different today. So AI's ability to predict what I want, or or its inability to look at my moods, look at my different expectations, is always going to be its falling. Right? I mean, out of 40 things that come recommended to you, you might say yes to 30 because they are convenient, but there will be 10 that are completely missed, irrespective of how good the AI is. Because those 10 are something that you like the other day, but don't like it today, and the AI gets confused. So, to answer the question simply, I don't think it will be many years, maybe 100 years before AI can really uh, dominate humans. And for that, some of it will have to be embedded in our brains. That's what I think.
All right. Next question we have is, what does matter the most, making beautiful things or making things efficient matter more? Like the trade-off between UI UX, I think.
So one, I don't think there has to be a trade-off. If you look at a Harley Davidson motorcycle, right? All parts are efficient, all parts are functional. You see all the parts, and the beauty lies in your ability to see how things work. So creating some plastic cover on some kind of a bike or so it's a very shallow way of looking at design. Design is when things work great and they are created such that things will work great. And then what comes out is something that automatically is beautiful. Our expectation or our standard of beauty is not going to be static. The only thing that will remain static is when the beauty is connected to function. So in design, we have this big saying form follows function, right? So how things look totally depend on how things function. And hence, there should not be any trade-off. You should not do beautiful things just for the sake of it. That is insulting. But yes, if you're doing functional things, you can actually make it look better or work better or be better just by putting things more logically. Again, coming back to the stories of Steve Jobs, where he wanted all the chips to be lined up straight, right? So those are, I mean, you might, and he was ridiculed saying that it's not required, nobody's going to see, but it's not for that. Because things are lined up and worked well, right from the assembly lines to people who might actually see it, it automatically creates a better sense of respect for the work that has been done. So beauty is always a resultant of great design, and that's the way it should be looked at.
Okay. So the next question we have is like, did you ever just a minute. Did you ever get into the flow of designing something that you didn't consider the engineering limitations of it? Did that ever happen to you?
So there is different processes in design. So the initially, I mean, the big thing about or advantage of us designers is we can switch off some part of our brain that tells us कि ये कभी होगा नहीं, this is stupid idea, this will never work, right? So that allows us to explore the boundaries of ideas, explore really wild things. And that's where the difference between an artist and a designer comes in. An artist is still creating things for himself, creating things without really express the emotion and not really worry about how things are going to be made. But design has to quickly, make it practical. Also, most often, or 99%, design is done for somebody else. I'm never going to design a bottle or something for me. I'm going to design it for somebody, maybe 100,000 people who are going to use it. So my ability to sort of create something that is usable automatically starts becoming important. And after I've sort of explored the wild horizons of ideas, you start knowing what is possible and start sort of creating the final ideas that are definitely practical. But yes, you cannot call yourself a designer if you cannot create practical products.
Okay, great. So the next question we have is, how do we balance privacy with the data collection required for AI to function well enough to offer good UX possibilities?
It's a bit too late. I mean, you might pretend that there is privacy, but there isn't. So yes, I mean, I can answer this question differently, saying that we can create solutions where you don't need to share certain data. There is this anonymous collection or anonymization of information that is there, so that only the AI will know certain aspects, but nobody else will know. When we're talking about creating relationships between you and product, one of the aspects that I said was trust. Right. So when I know that my phone is not transmitting my user habits to the end, in this case, Apple, I can start being more free with my phone, and then the phone will learn more about me. So what's going to happen as a part of an answer is a lot of AI is going to be what is called as edge AI. So edge AI is where a lot of the calculations, a lot of the memory, a lot of the data is started to be stored and computed at the device itself and not in the cloud. And that will allow you to have privacy, that will allow you to have better UX without worrying about confidentiality.
All right. So another question we have is, like, what process do you follow if you're doing a rebranding a rebranding only? Yeah.
So it's a very specific question. So I'm wondering why. But yes, there are multiple design processes that are typically used for various kinds of project. Rebranding, again, it will depend totally on the context, whether it's an app or whether it is a Taj Mahal Palace. It depends on a lot of things. But when a product already exists and we have to redesign it, whether it's on a branding point of view or UX point of view or something else, we have to take in consideration the goodwill and the value that it already has amongst its users, right? So there will be certain habits, there will be certain familiarity with a color or with a logo that people already have. So when you're rebranding or redesigning anything, you have to bring all those people along with you for the new brand so that they are not alienated. They don't feel as if this is going to their product. I mean, unless you are ashamed of the product that you had and hence you want to rebrand it so that people will forget about the whole product, you have to have some legacy, some history of those, whether it could be a simple color, it could be simplified graphics. There could be many elements that sort of bring familiarity towards what you're doing. So that has to be done so that the rebranding exercise is successful.
All right. So there's another question, which is like, how do you think experience design has evolved in the digital sphere from web to mobile to AR and to VR, and like what next?
So the simplest answer in terms of what has happened is earlier when you used to open a website or do something, you are willing to explore, you are willing to learn, you are willing to spend time, you are willing to give it some respect. Uh, what has happened because the UX have become more chic and more fashionable and more easy to use, people have stopped people have stopped expecting to put any effort to use a product. So the entire UX has become something that should be 100% go out on the day zero itself. And in many cases, when it comes to voice or it comes to other, you want the UX to be completely transparent. So whether you're using a product or using a experience, the UX or the interface should not come in your way between you and the product that you're using. So that's where the trends are going.
Okay, so like we are getting many questions of this kind also. What sorts of master programs offer the best opportunities in UX design?
So I would recommend IDC, which is IIT Bombay. Then NID is a very good college, again for postgraduate. But otherwise, worldwide there are many good schools that have good UX schools or UX professors. So you should look at that. But a lot of design is also self-taught. There are no books that you can by heart and hence become a designer. Design is learned by practicing it yourself, by having other people who discuss design, and by professors who will sort of correct you, guide you. So unless those three are not present, it is very risky to get into some design school that does not have all those three together. So your ability to interact with products and features and spaces, other people, professors, all of that is vital for you to become a designer. Practicing on the computer and learning books is going to be very shallow when it comes to design.
Okay, so that answers another question we had, that should we go to design school to learn design? I think.
Yeah, you should go, but go to a good school.
Okay. So so we can have one last question, I think. Do you think the logo should represent the values of a brand or be unique? What do you think about like Nike and Apple? They don't represent the brand, right?
Yeah. Okay, so no, why do you think Nike logo and Apple logo don't represent the brand? Because after a point, how the logo looks is not connected to what the logo stands for. The logo starts becoming a representation of all that you represent, all that you remember about a brand, all what a brand is trying to tell you about itself. Let me give you a very, maybe it's not a correct example, but in olden days, and even you used to add the name of your village, or your surname used to stand for what family you represent and who you are. And just by having that name, people used to assume that you have certain values, certain qualities, and you're supposed to be able to do something, right? So just a name automatically creates an impression about you without you having to do anything. So a logo or a brand, so logo is just a visual representation. A brand essentially is that it allows you to imagine so many things about the product that you have created perceptions for yourself by many exposures to the brand, whether it's through ads or by actually using the product. And that becomes the representation. Beyond the point, yes, initially when you're creating a new logo, you need to create something that has some tangible meaning so that you can represent how the logo looks or what the name is written to the kind of services that it is trying to offer. But after some time, it no longer matters. So, I mean, it doesn't matter what Amazon does, whether it is a Echo, which is like a speaker, or it is something online, or it is movies. It's a brand, and it's now become whatever it stands for, right? So brands take time, because it has to need to have a lot of exposure before you start creating your perception about a brand.
All right. I think that concludes this webinar.